There was a sharp, persistent knock on my door. It didn't ask for permission, just attention. It wasn't a courteous rap or a tentative tap. No, this was the type of knock that required an answer, the kind that carried entitlement in every echoing pound against the wood. I wasn't expecting company. I glanced at the clock. 8:12 p.m. I set my coffee down. It was too early for an emergency and too late for a delivery. A peculiar sensation twisted in my stomach like a silent warning as I walked carefully across the living room. When I opened the door, that sensation intensified into something real. Jared was standing there. I had seen him before. Too many times. He was younger, arrogant, the kind of guy who walked into a room like he owned it. My wife's new lover. He smirked slightly, his blonde hair slicked back just a little too perfectly. In his hand, he held a stack of papers, gripped between two fingers like a winning poker hand. "We're moving in," he said, pushing the papers in my direction. Jared anticipated a reaction, shock, maybe even anger. He was waiting for me to stumble, to watch my world fall apart at his feet, to be the fool, the man who had lost everything. But Jared had no idea. A smooth voice cut through the tension. "That's an interesting assumption." Jared stiffened. He turned just enough to see the sharply dressed man behind him. "Mr. Campbell, my attorney." His face was graying at the temples, a briefcase tucked under his arm. Jared's confidence faltered, if only for a moment, before he caught himself. Smirking, he shifted his stance. "Your ex-wife made it clear that I now own this house," he said. I exhaled slowly, stepping forward, my gaze steady. "Are you certain about that, Jared?" "Of course I'm sure." I nodded to Mr. Campbell. Jared's confidence wavered as the attorney pulled out his own set of documents, thicker, official, with legal stamps. "Mr. Jared," Campbell said smoothly, "would you mind showing me what you have there?" Jared hesitated. "Why?" "Because," Mr. Campbell replied, "I'd love to see the document that supposedly grants you ownership of this house." His faint smile made it seem condescending. Jared shoved the papers toward him. "Lena transferred ownership to me." "It's legal," he insisted. Mr. Campbell took his time, reading each word, each signature. Then with a quiet chuckle, he closed the file. "Interesting," he said. Jared's shoulders stiffened. "You were correct," I said. Jared's eyes darted. "Between us, what the hell does that mean?" Mr. Campbell sighed, looking at Jared like a teacher disappointed in a failing student. "Mr. Jared, these documents mean absolutely nothing." Jared blinked. "But Lena, she never had the right to give you this house," I said. Jared's mouth opened, but the words died before they could form. "That's not possible," he sputtered. "She told me—" "Shut it." His confusion was almost comical. "She was mistaken," Campbell interrupted. He pulled out another, even thicker folder. "This house was bequeathed to my client by his grandfather. The deed was never in Lena's name. Not in marriage. Not in the divorce settlement." I tilted my head. "She lied to you, Jared, and you believed her." The silence was deafening. Jared's face contorted, his jaw tightening as his brain processed what had just transpired. His fingers trembled, gripping the worthless papers in his hands. That can't be right." Mr. Campbell calmly packed up his briefcase. "Legally," he said, "Lena has no claim to this house, which means, Jared, neither do you." Jared's chest rose and fell, his breath growing heavier. His fists clenched. The reality of the situation was sinking in. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Did you really think you could just show up, flash a few documents, and take my house?" Jared's nostrils flared. Mr. Campbell cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "You bet on the wrong woman." The rage in Jared's eyes was exquisite. He opened his mouth, maybe to dispute, maybe to lash out. But then he realized the fight was already lost. His hands unclenched. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed down the steps. I watched as he stalked back to his car, pounded the steering wheel, and yanked open the driver's side door. Anger, frustration, defeat. Mr. Campbell adjusted his briefcase, clearly satisfied. I let out a small laugh. You have no idea, because this wasn't just about the house. This was about setting the tone. And if Jared thought this was over, he had no idea what was coming next. I hoped she would say sorry, that perhaps beneath all the falsehoods there was still a remnant of the lady I knew. But, "You think you've won," she responded, squaring her shoulders to conceal the vulnerability she had just displayed. I grinned, sadly knowing she had looked at me for a long time before. She exhaled at last, pivoted on her heel, and walked back to her car, slamming the door shut without saying another word. I watched her go as she revved the engine and sped out of my driveway. I had been relieved for a long time, but for the first time since this whole situation began, I realized Lena was no longer my problem. The thick, oppressive silence that had pervaded my home had changed. The rooms, which once felt like I was sitting next to a stranger during the last few months of my marriage, now held a different quiet. This serene silence was not that of a failing relationship, but rather the calm after a storm. Jared was going to crash hard. I had seen it in his expression before he left. The gradual disintegration of a man who believed he had everything figured out, only to discover he had been played. He had entered my house with a cocky, self-assured air, ready to claim something that had never been his. Yet I wanted to watch him direct his ire toward Lena after he folded like a lousy poker hand when reality hit him. That evening, while I sat on my back patio enjoying a drink, my phone rang. I didn't have to wait long. I smirked as I answered. The unknown number, knowing exactly who it was. But I didn't say a word. Jared's voice was raw with rage, the kind that comes from a man realizing he's been made a fool. "Was there anything you liked about it?" he spat. Foolish of me, I sipped my drink slowly before answering. "Enjoy what? Don't play dumb." I reclined back in my chair and watched the sun set. "You set me up," he accused, his voice bitter. I grinned. "No, Jared. She set you up. I simply let you walk right in." Silence. For a brief moment, I could almost hear the wheels spinning in his mind as the realization set in. "She had everything worked out," he whispered. "She was taking charge of her life after the divorce, and I trusted her." I shook my head. "That was your first mistake." Jared let out a harsh sigh. "I paid for this. I hired the movers, paid a deposit for renovations on a house that isn't even mine. You find that amusing?" I cocked my head slightly. Jared muttered a curse. "I thought you were the loser in this situation. Just a pitiful ex-husband holding on to a woman who didn't want him anymore. But you were just watching it all unravel, weren't you?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Jared laughed bitterly. "You played both of us," I corrected him. "No, Jared. She played both of us." His chuckle turned sour. "I suppose you had the last laugh." I swirled the whiskey in my glass before taking another sip. "Yes, Jared, I did." He was silent for a long time before muttering, "What the hell do I do now?" I shrugged. Not my problem, and with that I ended the call. Later that evening, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Jared. It was Lena. I nearly didn't answer, but curiosity won out. I picked up, keeping my tone composed. "You're really making the rounds tonight, huh?" She hesitated before responding. Her voice was softer than I expected. She started. I laughed. "We really don't need to discuss this, Lena." She let out a sharp breath. "Jared just ended things. He's losing it, threatening to sue me for fraud, saying he wants his money back." I arched an eyebrow. "Oh?" And here I thought he was different, that he understood you. Her voice faltered. "He's talking about telling my work everything." I smirked. You really do know how to pick them, don't you? She sighed. I need your help, I scoffed. You lied, Lena. You lied to him. You lied to me. And now everything is coming back to haunt you. You planned to trade up, but instead, you backed yourself into a corner. She was silent. I didn't expect this outcome, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I chuckled. That's your biggest problem, Lena. You never think ahead, she sniffed. I made a mistake, I smirked. You think I care? She exhaled shakily. I thought you'd fight for me when I asked for the divorce. I thought you'd struggle, that you'd beg me to stay, that you'd realize how much you needed me. I laughed, genuinely amused. You wanted me to chase after you? After you lied, cheated, and tried to take everything from me? She remained silent. I shook my head. Let me be clear, Lena. I don't need you. You weren't some great love. I wasn't some fool desperate to hold on. You were just a lesson I needed to learn. She inhaled sharply. So that's it? If you're looking for help, you won't find it here. I ended the call. For the first time in years, I felt free. Jared was gone. Lena was unraveling. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I stepped onto my porch with a fresh cup of coffee. The air was crisp, the sky bathed in warm hues of orange. The neighborhood hummed with life, the occasional car passing, the distant sound of a lawnmower, birds chirping in the trees. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. No more tension. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. No more questioning if my wife was really working late or if she was with someone else. I took a slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the rare stillness. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Sure enough, my phone vibrated. I sighed, glancing at the blocked number. Here we go? I answered, but said nothing. A few seconds of silence. Then, a timid, familiar voice. Lena. I leaned back in my chair, watching the early morning sun spread across my yard. It sounded like a personal problem, and I had no intention of making it mine.